So Ron asked me to just encapsulate my last 30 years of research in a 10-minute talk, and so I looked and abbreviated it down and found a couple of interesting parallels. And I'll start off by, let's see, there we go. It's kind of derivative of a talk that I've been developing in various places called man versus Helicobacter, and I just show you that because that is the name of the bacteria that we discovered that causes ulcers, and so probably nobody in this room has got a problem with ulcers. Whereas 20 years ago there would have been like 10 people in the room carrying a $100 box of Zantac in their pocket and taking it all the time for ulcers. This photograph was in Fortune magazine about 10 years ago. They came and did an article on the discovery and asked me to set up this kind of photograph with a commercial photographer. And so I rounded up some volunteers. I found out some interesting things, that my daughter-in-law has got a tattoo. That's her. My daughter had a pierced navel. I was totally horrified. And actually, the lady from one of my labs, she had some piercing and tattoos. And the rest of the guys, that's my son and a couple of nurses from Charles Gardner Hospital, so I always show that. It's a lot of fun. One of the lessons that I learned over the past, to making a new discovery that was so important, is going to save lives. Why did it take so long? Why was it so controversial? And really, this guy encapsulates the reason for that. And he's Daniel Boorstin. He was the librarian for the US Congress. He died about 15 years ago or something. But he's got whole books of famous quotes that he cooked up in his career. But he said the greatest obstacle to knowledge, it's not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge. So if it's ignorance and everybody admits that we know nothing about it, we're sitting in a vacuum, they're looking for a new discovery, we've got to solve this problem. But if you convince them all that they already know the answer, they're like, we already know that. We've got enough answers for that. We know 20 causes of ulcers. We don't need another one. It's just a small fine print, you see. So a couple of lessons there. If you've got to displace some pre-existing beliefs, a lot of times it's just going to take a generation. You've got to wait till the thought leaders mature and retire and the young guys coming up accept the new paradigm. So that's one of the things that happens there. So I have to say that the future of new technologies, discoveries and developments are the people that are straight out of college and haven't got their brains filled up with all this knowledge about technologies that are going to be obsolete in 10 or 15 years. And so these people are going to be where the new things are. And in universities, that'd be like curiosity-driven research. If it's interesting, then you should do it, in my opinion, and don't really worry too much about the outcome, because you might find a discovery there that relates to health or engineering or IT, who knows. This is a bacteria, Helicobacter pylori. Helico means corkscrew, curvy bacteria. Pylorus is the valve at the bottom of the stomach, and that's where we first found it, so that's what it looks like. And I'll show you a picture of ulcers. So here's a outline of the stomach there, and there's duodenal ulcers. People with high acidity get that, and there's a picture of an ulcer. This is where it's going to be located. And of course, it erodes into a blood vessel, then you start bleeding. You have to have a blood transfusion. You can't go on holidays. You might get HIV or hepatitis or something from having a blood transfusion in some godforsaken country where you happen to be working. So you can imagine how ulcers could affect your life. And gastric ulcer, they can burn right through the stomach wall, perforate, and you get peritonitis, and it's like a ruptured appendix. You die in 24 hours. So that's what people with ulcers were walking around, like hanging over their head, a little cloud over them for their whole life. And so that's why it's such an important discovery for people who suddenly could take an antibiotic treatment. Here's the cost of it. In America, 1 million hospitalizations, 6,000 deaths, a cost of $6 billion. And they said this is hospitalization, physician visits, decreased productivity and days lost from work. But that is a far, far underestimation of the cost, because this one, lost productivity. So you've got some guys in his 50s running a company, maybe he's running Rio or something like that. He gets an ulcer and his doctor says to him, too much stress. You have to resign, you have to retire, cash it all in, and now you can just travel around Australia in a caravan having a holiday for the rest of your life. You know, people used to do that in the 80s, for the last 100 years really. They've had that kind of advice, and I just saw a lot of people who, now they have a very quiet life because they were told to retire when they should have had another 20 years of productivity. So we have, saved a lot of money by making this discovery, of course. There's Dr. Warren. He's retired now, but this is Nobel Prize week. And we always have a celebratory beer down at the brewery this week. So we went out and had fish and chips and a couple of Guinness and different things recently, against medical advice, I'll have you know. So that's what happened. This year's Nobel Prize in Medicine was for in vitro fertilisation. So I know plenty of people who've had to use that. So there are thousands of people in Australia who would not exist if not for that technology. So it was definitely worth a good Nobel Prize. Well, what we did, we studied 100 patients coming with indigestion. This is a bit of our study. This is the total, 100. In those days, we always used to have 100 people in our research project. And that was very important in the 80s because we didn't have computers. And we could say, oh yeah, 34% had esophagus abnormal, 21% had this, 12% had bile in the stomach. We didn't need a computer to do the statistics. Nowadays you have thousands of people in your research. It's very easy. But we found that 13 people with a duodenal ulcer, 100% of them had the bacteria, highly significant. It's like getting red on the roulette wheel 13 times in a row. That's the p-value less than 1 in 10,000. But would the world accept the new cause for ulcers on the basis of data from only 13 patients? The answer is no way. And so that, they'd never heard of Western Australia, let alone Dr. Marshall and Dr. Warren. So we had a 15-year battle then to get the word out, and finally it was accepted about 1995. So I show this letter. It's when we had a conference in Perth. We submitted our paper. We said we're going to tell these doctors that we discovered the cause of ulcers in Perth, and they'll come back from this conference. They'll say, Perth is great. Anyway, they foiled us because they said, Dr. Marshall, we regret your research paper was not accepted for presentation. 67 were submitted. We could only accept 56. So don't feel so bad. There were one or two that were worse than yours. So this is what happens when you discover something new that people haven't heard of. You get rejected. But keep those rejection letters. And I've got that letter framed in my office now. And everybody, when they're sort of waiting for me to turn up, because I'm always late, and they're browsing in the things on my shelf, they read this, and you hear a great chuckle go up. But always keep your rejection letters, because many years later you can show them in your lecture and get good value out of them. Okay, so we went on to prove that the bacteria could infect healthy people, and one of the things I did was drink a brew of the bacteria, and that was immortalised in a comic strip published by a drug company, and they gave it to every doctor in America. So overnight, 150,000 doctors knew all about our discovery. And so that's what one of the advantages of the American system is. It's kind of conservative in some ways. It's hard to move it. But finally, when it does move, and if somebody's going to make $1 out of it, bingo, it happens overnight. And the government's not going to print 150,000 copies of a comic for all the GPs in America and have reps, thousands of reps going out. It's done in private industry in America. So they then changed over in about 97 when the first treatment came out, and I'm there no other way. I was throwing up, etc. Anyway, and that's my stomach biopsy showing the bacteria here. And so then a few years later we win the Nobel Prize. It was obvious that we should have won it earlier, but there were various reasons, like they like to give it to the senior guys, and there's a few good ones waiting in the wings though that are collected for over the years. Anyway, so they gave that to us in 2005. So after you win the Nobel Prize, what do you do that? Well, luckily, I didn't retire. I already was starting a biotech company in Western Australia to use these bacteria now to create vaccines. And of course, we don't have patients with the bacteria anymore. Where do we get them from? Well, the last 20 years of research, we've been storing them in the fridge. We've got thousands of them in our fridge at QE2 in the research lab. And we know which patient, what date, etc., whether he had ulcers or not. And in fact, most people that have these bacteria don't even know they've got them. So it's only a small proportion get ulcers. So there are people in this room who've got them and will not have a day's illness in their life. So we said, well, maybe we can actually use the friendly strains to use it, make a useful product. So we said, well, reprogramming for H. pylori for a good use would be what we want to do. And so here you see H. pylori. It's got Helicobacter pylori, that means. A few toxin genes in it, and we can cut those out with molecular biology. So that's the technology that every university lab has nowadays. You can just get in the DNA and remove the toxin genes, no problem. And I'm only going to talk for 1 more minute, so you don't have to bring the hook. And put new genes in there. And so we could imagine that we're going to make a vaccine that you drink. It colonises your stomach for a few weeks, and it can vaccinate you with these different things. And we can put influenza, H1N1, malaria, hepatitis C, tetanus, TB. There's unending different opportunities with this kind of strategy. So we're going along feeding these bacteria to mice now, so the mice are drinking these special modified bacteria. And sure enough, and this is a H1 influenza vaccine, and this is the antibody response. And so these are different kinds of vaccine expression on the bacteria. This is no vaccine. And then this is the antibodies in the mice after about 96 days, actually. So it's one of our first trials, not very strong. But here's a flu vaccine, Helicobacter, and the mice have got antibodies. So suddenly we've got a way where we could make a flu vaccine. People would just drink it, buy it in the supermarket, and it would only take about 2 months instead of 6 months like the current CSL. So the future of the vaccine you might be able to buy something like this in the supermarket. It gives you tetanus, rubella, SARS, malaria, hepatitis C, HIV and TB. It might be like a travel vaccine. When you're going to Africa, you go through immigration, you're waiting for your plane to take off. You think, oh, damn, I forgot to go to Traveller's Clinic. But then you see a thing like a big Coke machine there. You put a $100 bill in and it goes, out comes the Africa. You press Africa, out comes a little 6-pack of yogurts, which you start drinking on the plane. But it's a great product because it's just like a food product. You say, Jesus, I want to be doubly sure that I'm vaccinated. I'll buy 2. And so, the sales of it go up through the roof, as you can imagine. This is in my dreams. Here's our team at QE2 working on it. The people from all over the world have come to work on this the last 5 years. But here's the question, and here's the coincidence I have with this meeting. In Western Australia, if we make a vaccine, who owns it? So a public patient with stomach symptoms has an endoscopy. He agrees to be in my research. Bacteria are collected during a test. Patients will do that. The bacteria are in the fridge. University of WA gives bacteria to Ondeck, it's my company, the WA vaccine company, and we make a new oral vaccine. A new oral vaccine is produced, no needles, great product. 5 years later, 10 years later, product revenues, $100 million per annum. That's quite normal for a good biotech product. So I'm saying 2020. So bad luck, folks, it's not now. Anyway, 2020. So we've got that product. Then who really owns the bacteria that we're using for our vaccine that we got out of that fridge at QE2? The University of WA says, it's ours. It's our research project. West Australian government says, it's ours. It came out of Charles Gardner Hospital. And we own all the IP for every public servant in Western Australia. The patient says, hang on a minute, it's really mine. Because I didn't give you permission to make $1 billion vaccine out of it, and I still own it. And the relatives of a deceased patient say, it's ours, and there's 50 of us, and it's really in our family, and it's ours. And so at that point, Ondeck says, we're out of here. We're going to America. And in that country, people know who owns things. But in Western Australia, we don't. So with that, I'll let you think about that during your conference. Thank you.